Hey guys! Today we're going to be making this miniature koi pond using mainly polymer clay and resin, so I really hope you'll enjoy. First you just want to take a piece of tinfoil and make the basic shape of the pond, kind of like a small dish or bowl. Then once you have that, you can start covering the edges with clay. I chose to use a couple of shades of grey, but you can really use any colors of scrap clay you have laying around, as we're going to be painting it later. And if you're worried about using too much clay for this, you can just use more tinfoil to make the core larger. Next I started adding some texture. I first went over it with tinfoil, then a pointy dotting tool, and lastly a toothbrush. Another option if you're not in the mood for sculpting the rocks the same way I did is to either just find some outside or go to any craft shop or flower supply shops that sell those little bags or jars of pebbles. After baking, you can then paint it using acrylic paint. And you want to make sure to seal everything that is painted that you put inside the pond with glaze. For the bottom of the pond, I mixed brown sand with glaze and then spread that out on top of the tinfoil. I also added some more rough sand or tiny gravel on top, just to add some more texture. To make the different plants, I first took some paper and painted it with green watercolors, but you can also use acrylic paint. And I then cut that into thin strips. Next, I cut some leaf shapes out of a thin sheet of clay. Flattened them a bit more and then added some texture using a pointy dotting tool and a toothbrush. Give them a tiny bit of shape and bunch them up like this. And I then glued this onto the pond together with some preserved moss. And just to make it look a tad less cartoony or radioactive, I added some shading using acrylic paint. Finally, for some extra detail, I used a damp brush to apply some green soft pastel around the edges. And again, you want to make sure to seal it with glaze. You then want to mix a small amount of resin, just enough to cover the bottom, then pour that in and set it aside. To make the koi fish, I took a mix of white and translucent and used a piece of metal to sculpt on. It doesn't have to be anything special, any type of metal from a can of food or something similar will work. To make the details, I really only used my pointy dotting tool, and then to make the scale effect you can use any type of tool that has that kind of checkered pattern on the side. For the fins, you want to take a really thin sheet of clay, cut out the basic shape, and then use your X-Acto knife to add the lines. Lastly, you want to add the tiny mustache and bake. And after baking, you want to paint it. I first used acrylic paint and then I added some Pearl X pigment using matte glaze to apply it. Once the resin in your pond is thick enough so that the fish won't sink, you can add the fish and then pour some more resin on top. I also made kind of like a small waterfall using pieces of cling film, dipped them in the resin and then attached them to the sides. Then once the resin has almost cured, you can add some texture to make it look a bit more realistic. Last thing we're going to be making are the lily pads, and for these you just want to flatten some green clay. Cut away a triangular piece like this. And then add some texture. I used a couple of silicone tools, but you can also use some dotting tools and a needle tool. Add some light texture using a toothbrush and bake. After baking, I first added a tiny bit of shading using some green pastel, then sealed it with a matte glaze and added some acrylic paint. Place them into the pond while the surface is still sticky, and you're done.